A Novara Media exclusive has found that a prestigious Russell Group university, King's College London, has indefinitely suspended a student for pro-Palestine activism on campus, after pressure from a pro-Israel lobby group. An indefinite suspension means the student in question, a 21-year-old Osama Ghanem, will have his visa withdrawn and be sent back to his home country of Egypt. Crucially, King's College London were aware that Osama and his immediate family members had previously been imprisoned and tortured in Egypt for speaking out against the regime. The university also knew that Osama had a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder due to his treatment in Egypt, and that he was at risk of further mistreatment if he was sent back there. Osama is now taking King's College London to court for alleged breaches of his human rights, assault and personal injury, discrimination and harassment. King's College London told Novara Media that it is inaccurate to suggest that an investigation commenced after a single complaint. A KCL spokesperson also said this: "The university is committed to upholding and protecting freedom of expression and to right to protest within the law, and we take proportionate action when behaviour breaches our policies, decided upon through our robust processes and procedures." Earlier today, I spoke to Novara Media's own Harriet Williamson about her exclusive. I started by asking Harriet if KCL were engaging in deliberate endangerment.
Yeah, it certainly looks like it. And King's College London's decision to indefinitely suspend Osama certainly has endangered him, whether deliberately or not. I couldn't say, but Osama was in a uniquely vulnerable position as an international student from overseas. He has obviously, as many international students do, given a great deal of money to the university in order to be able to study there, or taken on a great deal of debt for the future to be able to get a degree from such a prestigious institution. And if this was a British resident student we were talking about who had received an indefinite suspension, yes, it's an incredibly harsh sanction, but they would go back to their home in the UK. Osama, in this case, will have his student visa withdrawn, and he will have to go back to Egypt, where he, his brother, and his father, who sadly is no longer alive, were all imprisoned and tortured for speaking out against the Egyptian regime. Osama said to Novara Media that he knows what it's like to live in authoritarian societies. He lived in both Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and he compared the actions of King's College London to those authoritarian regimes. And he said that the behaviour of King's was straight out of the Trump playbook. So Osama was vulnerable because of where he was from and as an international student. King's knew that. Osama wrote openly in his statement to King's when he applied to the international relations course, saying that his father and brother had been tortured in Egypt and that he himself taken part in a great deal of sort of political activism, political documentary making, and that he wanted to get a political education in order to make the world a better place. They didn't think that Osama was this sort of wilting wallflower apolitical student who wouldn't get involved in campus activism. And they also knew that Osama had a PTSD diagnosis from the really, really shocking and violent treatment that he'd been subjected to by the Egyptian authorities. So yeah, deliberate endangerment. From where I'm standing, it doesn't look like King's have behaved in the best interests of their own students. I think a criticism of King's could be here that they have actually behaved in the interests of the pro-Israel lobby rather than the students that come to their own institutions to learn, like Osama.
Can you expand upon the role of the pro-Israel lobby in this story?
So the part of this story that actually feels really egregious is that Osama was sanctioned 3 times for pro-Palestine activism on campus. The first one was for protesting the King's Alumni Awards ceremony, and that was in the summer of last year, of 2024. And for that, he was excluded from campus under emergency powers. He was also excluded from campus under emergency powers again for protesting the London Defence Conference in the spring of this year, 2025. And those events were far higher profile than the event that he protested in February of this year that actually got him the most serious sanction, which is the indefinite suspension. That one was quite a small panel discussion between 2 people. It's about Iranian-Israeli relations, and it was held in like a standard-sized lecture theatre and only attended by about 40 people. Like, it wasn't particularly high profile. It had a fairly controversial speaker. It was a pro-Israel Iranian policy researcher whose social media presence is quite contentious in like how much she supports Netanyahu. I've spoken to the people who are part of the Iranian diaspora in this country, and they say that her views are quite fringe. This was a small event. Some students protested. The two people on the panel walked out of the room very quickly. They did not engage with protesters. Security came into the room. The event was cancelled in about 25 minutes. There was some chanting. Everyone went home. That's as far as we know it. But Campaign Against Anti-Semitism wrote a letter following this event to the leadership of King's College London, and that letter was seen by Novara media. Campaign Against Anti-Semitism called for the incident to be investigated and for the university to take action against the students involved. This feels like pressure, it feels like interference, and what we know about Campaign Against Anti-Semitism is that it's led by somebody called Gideon Faulkner, who in April last year attempted to spark some sort of confrontation at a national march in solidarity with the people of Palestine while they're suffering a genocide at the hands of Israel. And Faulkner put out a bit of a misleading video saying that he hadn't been allowed to walk through the march because he was wearing a kippah, a Jewish skull cap, and he looked openly Jewish. Now, that interaction with a Met officer was actually found to be part of a much longer conversation that they had, where Faulkner seemed like he really wanted to be there to cause a bit of trouble. And the stance from the police when these great big marches for Palestine happens is that counter protesters aren't supposed to be mixed in with protesters. They're supposed to be kept separate. And that was why this Met officer wasn't particularly sure about Gideon Faulkner being able to just walk through the March for Palestine. And he sort of made it seem like, in fact, he very much did make it seem like Jewish people would not be welcome in the National March for Palestine, which is absolutely not true. And we know this because every time there is one, there's a very large Jewish bloc. There are people in Orthodox Jewish dress, plenty of people wearing skull caps. Some of them are like knitted to resemble watermelons, which is a symbol of Palestinian solidarity. And if you go on one of these marches, you will be walking side by side with your Jewish brothers and sisters who don't believe that the people in Gaza should be bombed, starved, or have crimes against humanity committed against them by the state of Israel. And, you know, people like Gideon Faulkner, who leads the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, and, you know, this is an organisation that has been called overly politicised. It says it's a charity, but it gets involved in political matters. It's vexatious. This action of Gideon Faulkner's last year, it feels really misleading and about stoking fear within the Jewish community rather than keeping them safer in Britain. These are the pro-Israel organisations that are interfering in British public life. And I think that is what this story, you know, that's something that this story really pulls out for us, is that these lobbying organisations have a great deal of power in that they can put pressure on institutions and sort of get what they want out of it. I mean, King's, of course, says that it would be inaccurate to suggest that after one complaint, this decision was made. But I think people can draw their own conclusions over whether there was influence there.
And when it comes to King's College London, you said that one of their conflicts of interest here is the investments and the endowments they have that are related to Israel. Can you tell us more about those?
According to the King's College London BDS forum, King's has about 20 million invested in companies complicit in Israeli apartheid, surveillance and illegal occupation. And a lot of these companies are the ones that were name-checked in Francesca Albanese's UN report about companies who have actually profited from the machinery of genocide since October 2023. Now, King's says it's got an ethical investment policy, but a lot of places say that, and I'm not sure in a lot of cases it actually means that much. And as of last summer, in a win for the King's Gaza Solidarity encampment on campus, King said it would no longer be investing in companies that make controversial weapons. Now, in this instance, controversial weapons means things like cluster bombs, landmine, depleted uranium weapons, and chemical and biological weapons. It doesn't mean the regular weapons that have been widely used in Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza, which has gone on for 2 years now, and a fragile ceasefire is, just about staying together, even though Israel continued to violate it loads of times. But apparently that's not real violations of the ceasefire because it's Israel doing it. But yeah, King says it's got this ethical investment policy, but it still invests in companies that make conventional weapons. And this is a key point because it is the conventional weapons that have killed a conservative estimate of 68,000 people in Gaza over the last 2 years. It's not these controversial weapons, really. F-35, an F-35 jet is a conventional weapon. It's not a controversial one. And I think that one thing about this story that I'd really like to pull out for our viewers here is that students have historically been incredibly sort of active and vocal for a lot of progressive causes. Students often have very strong moral compasses because they kind of have less to lose in that they don't have like a career or a mortgage yet. They're getting all sorts of ideas at uni that they're exploring. They tend to be quite like politically radical and idealistic. So it's not a surprise to anybody that students feel really strongly about what Israel's been doing in Gaza over the last 2 years and for decades previously. But what perhaps is a bit of a surprise is that the unis themselves seem kind of shocked by it. And they kind of don't know how to react unless it's in a really authoritarian way. And that's what we've seen from King's. Like King's revised the rules on campus protests to outlaw any protest they assess to be intentionally causing an intimidating environment. And that was after the campus. They rewrote their rules. And who is assessing whether something is creating an intimidating environment? Who is assessing whether a protest is disruptive or not? A protest that's disruptive, I wager, is a protest that isn't really working. Now, you've got King's in this case actually paying a private investigation company called B360 to look into Osama and compile an 18-page report on his activities. And, this is before he says he was even asked to give his side of things. And the use of emergency powers against him. I think that King's comes off as incredibly authoritarian here and not really being bothered about the well-being of students like Osama when we think about the information that they had about him and about the risks to him if his student visa was withdrawn and he would have to go back to Egypt, and the fact that they rejected his appeal against the indefinite suspension anyway.
That was Novara's Harriet Williamson speaking to me earlier today. Her exclusive article will be linked for you down there in the description. I highly, highly, highly recommend you go and read it. It's a very important story, that one.